author of Killing for Krishna and 11 Naked Emperors. I directly ordered both of these books from the man himself. I very much appreciate him coming to my show and talk to people about his research and his general experience with becoming a devotee of Krishna, being involved in ISKCON and New Vrindavan, which is something that I'm very curious and interested about, and we might talk more about various angles of politics revolved around that, but just people who want a history, want to know more about it. And, this is the man who is publishing information, so I appreciate you coming to talk to us.
The pleasure's mine, David.
Okay, so I have a varying audience. Some people, say may know very little about ISKCON or Krishna, may never heard of New Vrindavan. To some people may have been there many times. So if you want to give a brief bio of maybe your spiritual transformation, how you got involved with ISKCON to living in New Vrindavan, from where you were raised, and if you want to go completely through to the present day to where your spiritual beliefs are today, and then also in relations to your authorship of these books and the future books you plan on publishing on the subject.
Sure. So, as an introduction, for people who may not be familiar with the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, I should mention that in September 1965, I was about 9 years old at that time. An Indian Swami, following in the Gaudiya Vaishnava tradition, stepped off a freighter ship in New York City at the harbor. And his mission, which was given to him by his guru, his spiritual master, back in 1932 or something, he says he was to preach in the West. And before this time, very few Indian gurus had come to the West. There were notable swamis who did come to the West. However, they were not following the Gaudiya Vaishnava line, which A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, that was his tradition. The Bengali Vaishnavas, which worship Lord Chaitanya, who appeared some 500 and some years ago in Bengal, and basically revived the Vaishnava faith and instituted some programs such as chanting out loud, all right, with large masses of people, with drums and cymbals, and his movement spread. Really, he was very charismatic, and Gaudiya Vaishnavas believe that he is actually Krishna or God himself. And but in any case, so Swami Bhaktivedanta comes over from India in '65, and after almost a year, he found his followers, all right, and they were the hippies and members of the counterculture. And they were attracted to him and his teachings for many reasons. One is that most of the hippies were frustrated with the world that they grew up in, the establishment, all right, working 9 to 5, all right, having to follow strict moral codes and things like that. And they had discovered things like marijuana, LSD, which they felt it was revealing in their minds a whole new realities. All right, so they were already at odds with the Society of America in 1966. All right. So, and then the Swami's Bhaktivedanta's teachings and the chanting of the Hare Krishna mantra is like a meditation, all right? And there were so many attractive features. Even the God Krishna, all right, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, he was in some ways like a hippie. He had beautiful long black hair. He wore jewelry, peacock feathers, in his hat, played the flute, had lots of girlfriends, but Swami Bhaktivedanta would not let his followers have lots of girlfriends because he was very conservative in following the strict principles of his faith. So anyway, but Swami Bhaktivedanta passed away in 1977, and shortly after, the highest committee in ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, the GBC it's called, they appointed 11 successors, and this is discussed quite in detail in 11 Naked Emperors. The thing about the 11 who took over is that they pretended to be something they were not. They pretended to be acharyas. Acharya is what in ISKCON is known as an uttama adhikari, in the highest stage. I mean, a completely self-realized soul. All right, and they weren't. It turned out, as soon as 2 years later, some of them really started embarrassing the entire society by their antics and activities. And in any case, I became interested in the Hare Krishna movement right around the time I finished my music, got my undergraduate degree in music. And I first came to New Vrindaban, which is the ISKCON agricultural community in West Virginia. And I lived there 15 years. My spiritual master was Kirtanananda Swami, later known as Swami Bhaktipada. And I had a great time. I was there 15 years, but the last couple of years, I really began to see cracks in my spiritual master, which, eventually I discovered that he was a pretender. He wasn't really an uttama adhikari as we all believed in. So basically, I rejected him as my guru and left. So as the years passed, I had a large archive of New Vrindavan publications. I'm a collector in some ways like that. And after, it might have been 6, 7, 8 years after I left, I moved to Pittsburgh, and I could visit frequently, and I had many friends there, even today. And one time I was visiting, and I met an old acquaintance, Satyavrata from Toronto, who had lived in the community back in the 1990, 91.
Not to interrupt you, did you say Satyagraha, like Gandhi's nonviolence movement?
Excuse me, Satyavrata, V-R-A-T-A.
Okay.
Satyavrata or Satyavrata. But anyway, so and he lived there when I was director of the temple orchestra, and he was a really fine musician. He played viola, and I just really enjoyed his company. He really helped make the music wonderful that we composed and wrote and performed at the temple services. And when he came to visit 7, 8 years later, he was telling me all these stories about stuff we did together that I had forgotten. And I really loved that music that we used to do there. I thought it was like very beautiful, inspiring. Many people loved it also. Not all right? A lot of people did not like it, but
usually when you got out of there that you had largely kind of turned your back and attached everything to it as negative, and then this devotee comes to you and reminds you of all the positive memories you had, so that you start taking a more nuanced approach.
Actually, not quite. My memories were positive, overwhelmingly positive. I had negative experiences, but there were not many. I really enjoyed living at New Vrindavan and serving Krishna and helping build the community and producing gorgeous music for the deities and the devotees. It was. I'll get back to when I discovered a lot of the criminal activities that happened, which I really was not aware of during my
But
time.
at this point, you're still living the lifestyle, even though you're not following Kirtananda.
More or less, more or less. I mean, I was, still chanting on beads like that. So anyway, so when I'm talking to Satyavrata and he's reminding me of all these pastimes that I've forgotten, I decided I've got to write an article about the music, just for posterity, because I thought it was beautiful music. I didn't want to forget it. So as I was researching and interviewing people and going through my collection of New Vrindavan publications and letters from Swami Bhaktipada, I realized that the music that we did at the community, which was in a Western classical church style, was quite a radical difference from what ISKCON music is about. The ISKCON music that Bhaktivedanta Swami brought from India is traditional Bengali Vaishnav tunes sung in Bengali or Sanskrit, accompanied by traditional Indian instruments like the Majanga drums and the Kartal cymbals. I'm gonna try to streamline this story a little bit now because I think I'm getting into too many details. But in any case, I had to explain how this music began, and that had to do with Swami Bhaktipada's reformation. He wanted to de-Indianize Krishna consciousness, take out the Indian aspects and transplant it into a Western culture, which is why we were doing Western music. Some were equal. The lyrics were changed, translated into English. We wore robes that were a European style, not an Indian style, like a Franciscan robe. Anyway, and then I had to explain how this 8-year period of music at New Vrindavan ended. And that it ended because Swami Bhaktipada was caught in the act of having sexual relations with one of his teenage disciples. And the community had split in half, and within a year, he was basically told to leave. And the community went back to this guy. So now I have a whole history now of the community. So my book turned into a whole history of New Vrindavan, not just about the music that I was involved in, but a whole history from 1968 up until almost the present. And I started writing, and I came back to the community. I would visit several times a year for festivals and to see my old friends. And during
That's why
one visit,
I had found your work on the web about that before Killing for Krishna ever came out, and that was originally what had interested me, was more your generic history and how New Vrindavan operated, and I love chanting and music also, and was specifically that subject.
correct. I think it was close to 20 years ago. I put a page up on my website called New Vrindavan, the Black Sheep of ISKCON. And I started describing what this book was going to be and the chapters in this, which you had seen. So to finish this up, around 2003, I was visiting the community and I had a 300-page manuscript, which I was showing to people, because I want to interview people, get their eyewitness accounts. And one of my friends, Kapapunj, Terry Sheldon, he said, Rishikesh, which was my initiated name, he said, Rishikesh, I've got to show you something. And he walked me up the hill, past the palace. Across the street is a gravel parking lot with abandoned vehicles, an old metal water tower, and there was a tractor trailer. And we climbed up, unlocked the trailer doors, and walked inside, and inside was boxes and boxes and filing cabinets filled with New Vrindavan and ISKCON publications, Swami Bhaktipada's personal correspondence from the late 70s up into the 90s, the letters that he had written to people. copies of them. And there was boxes of trial transcripts and tape recordings. And Papa Punj said, Rishikesh, you're writing a history of New Vrindavan. You should have this. He gave me the whole thing. I had to rent a truck to pack it up and bring it to my home in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And it took me
I read the story in your book, but you're welcome to tell it over again.
Yeah. It took me about 10 years to read through everything there because there's so much of it. And I do other things too. I mean, I have to make a living, so it was just a part-time thing. But in those archives was 1 or 2 boxes dealing with the trial of Kirtanananda Swami and others about the murder of Steve Bryant. And this was like classified information. Very few people probably even knew it was there. In fact, if Papa Punj knew it was there, he probably would have burned it rather than give it to me, because it's very incriminating. In fact, Papa Punj himself, he served 5 years in prison for this murder. And the murders of Steve Bryant, which I talk about in my first book, Learn from Krishna.
And for those listening, I'm here in Southfield, which is less than 10 miles away from Royal Oak, and I've done Harinam in Royal Oak, where that man is from. Although I never even heard of him when I got involved in this time. It was much later I even heard of him.
Yeah. So when I discovered that all these leaders whom I respected while I lived there were involved in this murder conspiracy, I became depressed. It's like, all my 15 years there and many years afterwards, I had thought that I was participating in a spiritual community, to help spread love of God and uplift humanity. And now I discover that actually I'm part of a criminal enterprise. All right. And we were blinded. We didn't know what was happening at the higher circle. So I felt I had wasted all my time, because here I'm supporting this criminal enterprise. And not just the one murder, there were at least 2. There was a third murder plot, which never went on, against people that were trying to do harm or expose my spiritual master as a pedophile, which later we found out he was. So I became depressed, and then I decided, well, this has to be the first book that comes out about this murder, because I was so shocked to discover all these documents. And so anyway, 2 years ago, Killing for Krishna came out, and when it was published, I began receiving all these letters and emails and Facebook messages from people I did not know, but they had seen and read the book, and they were thanking me for writing that, because for them it was a healing process. A lot of these people had been emotionally or physically abused during their time with the Hare Krishnas, and this inside look at how things were working at that time really brought a lot of healing to them. One fellow in Dallas, Texas, told me that he was a member of ISKCON for 12 years, and he was emotionally traumatized. And after he left, he had been seeing a psychologist or a therapist about once a week. And he said once he read my book, he understood so much, and he felt such healing in his heart that he only goes to his therapist once a month or every other month, like that. So anyway, so that's how these books came out. So now I feel maybe Krishna put me at New Vrindavan for a reason, to help all those other people understand what happened to them, and when they understand, they can better heal from whatever emotional trauma they might have experienced there. Well, so there's the story.
Well, before I start asking you questions, did you want to continue with your spiritual transformation to where you are today?
Well, You know, I don't consider myself a spiritual person. All right.
When you
I
became an atheist or something, or I
No,
don't
I'm not an
want to
atheist.
press you.
I am not an atheist. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, it's you were asking me about a personal journey. Wow. I mean, I grew up Roman Catholic. I went to Catholic schools for 12 years, and but I mean, I went to mass and everything with my family, but I never really had any religious experiences. And then when I went off to college, I think I went to two Sunday masses, and then I said, what good is this for me? You know, it's not doing me any good. So I basically rejected that. However, a few years later, I went to hear Baba Ramdas speak at a.
Actually, someone in the chat just asked about Ram Dass and connections with also him allegations of abuse.
You know, I don't know these stories, but if it's anything like the stories in ISKCON, uh, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Do you think you were on a, so to say, a naive place, or you think it was pretty much covered up, where even if you weren't naive or not naive at all, that still basically anyone who wasn't in on it didn't know about it?
Well, I certainly was greatly naive when I was 22 years old when I joined, and in some ways, maybe I still am. But I'm in the last 42 years, I've experienced and seen a lot of different things. So, you know, if I knew now at the age of 64 what I knew, if I knew what I know now when I was 22, you know, I don't think I would have fallen for the.
You say you were never a believer, so to say, in terms like you were more culturally, or just this is how you wanted to live your lifestyle, the chanting and the music, or was there a point where you had believed in Krishna, you believed in the Vedas, you believed the Bhagavad Gita, and if so, how did that change till today? I mean, I don't know if like I said, if you say like I'm a Hindu, or if you're a universalist, or you're kind of like a pick and choose spiritualist.
Well. See, after when I came to New Vrindaban, I was uh, captivated by Kirtanananda Swami, right? And there was some. I felt an emotional connection. I thought he was very wise, and as a child, my father and I, although he was a great father, we were cut from different cloths. See, I loved reading and the classical music, and he was a kind of guy who liked to work in the garden. That's what he loved, gardening. And I hated pulling weeds, so I think he might have been on a subtle level maybe a little disappointed with me. So there must have been some unmet emotional needs in my heart. And when I met Swami Bhaktipat, here is this wise and cultured and a very spiritual man, and I felt he was a substitute father. And I did not discover this within myself until many, many years later. But that's really what attracted me. Of course, vegetarianism, the chanting, I love that, and the deities and the lifestyle. Very renounced, sleeping on a sleeping bag on the floor. But when I was in the brahmachari ashram at Old Vrindaban Farm, they didn't even have an indoor toilet or an outdoor toilet. There was just a field outside, and you put this coat on. They called it the stool coat, and you go out there and you squat, and you brought a shovel. So if the ground wasn't frozen, you could bury it. All right, I mean, it was very primitive, but for some reason.
Well, I mean, musically, at least from your musical proclivities, you found a place to maximize, your potential in a setting that you felt comfortable.
No, not at all. not for the first 8 years. Okay, the music is Bengali Vaishnav, like folk tunes, you know, and I didn't. It wasn't musically interesting to me at all. In fact, that was the hardest thing for me to give up was classical music. This is a pioneer community, all right? And Swami Bhaktipad, or Kirtanananda, we called him at the time, Maharaj, we called him. He told me, he said, my first day I met him, he talked about the Ramayana, the Hindu epic, which talks about Lord Ramachandra, the king, all right, and his wife Sita, and the great battle with the demon Ravana and the monkey king Hanuman, who comes and fights with him. And he said this would be a great opera someday. And here at New Vrindaban, we're going to have a symphony orchestra and an opera company. And I started thinking, well, oh my God, I'd love to be part of that. I mean, I love classical music. I love orchestra. I played with many orchestras. I've actually sang once in an opera when I was in college. And I said, but I could see this is a pioneer community. This ain't going to happen for a decade or more like that, you know. So in the beginning, the only thing that kept me going was chanting Hare Krishna and hearing my spiritual master speaking. We began to develop a relationship, a loving relationship. See, the music was hard for me to give up, but then about 10 years later, he began to de-Indianize Krishna consciousness at the community and Christianizing it, and then I became a very valuable person to him because I was trained in all that. I had a bachelor degree in piano performance and music education, and I was a composer, an organist. See, so that's how this, what I think was really wonderful music, came about. But the first 8 years, I wasn't there because of the music.
Oh, so I'm losing you for a second. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, you cut off for the last seconds. Okay, so I appreciate that, and I'm not sure if you want to talk about maybe the prominence of Radhanath Swami today, or the direction ISKCON went versus the initial direction, or maybe the role of your scholarship among various peoples. Because I read you would consider trying to even hold this book back a few years to have it academically published, but then you wouldn't have been able to publish it and would have had to go through a bunch of changes. And a lot of people suffer for an audience. Detroit ISKCON. I have Sri Nandana, Stephen Knapp, if you're familiar. I have almost all his books, and he, I guess, although he's a semi-popular author within ISKCON, he's largely the Hindu community. Versus, it seemed like your Killing for Krishna was almost like a real-life crime drama that might have been interesting outside of the people who wanted a crime drama. And I mean, I could fire a whole bunch of random questions too, like how much you were familiar with the temple project and those devotees, if they were through New Vrindavan, like the Sadhuputa and Michael Cremo I met and drove him around when he brought his book, one of his book, on a book tour here in Detroit. So I don't know if you were involved in some of those movements like Sadhuputa and like the physicists and this research into Vaishnava cosmology, which is very interesting to me. I had a background in physics. And then, maybe your view as your view of your scholarship, your writings to a general audience that might take value from it from all different types of purposes.
Well, I never thought that I'd be writing a history of the New Vrindavan community, or writing about the zonal Acharya era of ISKCON, where the 11 big priests basically took over the
and only karma could have produced it. There's no way that anyone could have predicted you're going to be the historian of New Vrindavan when you were there, and it's only a circumstance of events and karma that led to that.
Right, and primarily the acquisition of the Swami Bhaktipad archives. These were locked in the basement of his house, in a little room with iron bars protecting it. There's a lot of confidential things in there. And after he went to prison, some young men who were boys who grew up at the community broke into the house. The house was abandoned, and they broke into this room, and they were very angry, and they threw a lot of stuff all over the floor. And then another young man who also grew up at the community heard about this, so he went there to the house, and he saw all these artifacts and documents, and he thought maybe someone's going to need this someday if someone writes a history of New Vrindaban. So he collected everything and kept it in his cabin for a few years. And then when he left the community, he gave it to Tapa Punj, who then gave it to me. And when I discovered all these horrible things that were going on, by reading the trial transcripts and the investigative reports, and I decided, it became my sacred duty to share this with others. And so there's basically three books. Two are finished: Killing for Krishna, the story of the assassination of a Hare Krishna devotee, Stephen Bryant, who used to live at New Vrindaban. His wife still lives there. Actually, I taught piano to her children back in the early 90s, after his death. And then 11 Naked Emperors, about what I'll call the takeover. Not everyone says it was a takeover, but really it was, of the 11 taking over the Hare Krishna movement. And then the third one is this biography of Swami Bhaktipad and a history of the New Vrindavan community. That will be a multi-volume work. But I see it as my sacred duty. And really, if I don't do anything else in my life except get these 3 books published, I'll be ready to die. Because anything else I do, to me, although valuable, whatever music I do, I teach children chess, for instance. These are, to me, wonderful things that I just love to do. But if I can make any contribution to the world, nothing's going to surpass these 3 books.
Yeah, but that's a commonality we have. We're both chess coaches, and it's really the third book that you plan on writing that I'm looking forward to. And when I first found your webpage, I told you that was what I was looking for. I go, these are really great books, probably the best book on the subject. And I bought other books. Like I ended up buying this 100 Monkeys book by Mr. Drescher that I found in your book. And it's hard to make any sense out of that. God forbid he claims to have killed multiple people in this book. Before ISKCON, he personally writes about killing multiple people. And I'm not sure if that's credible. Like if the police would have, found this book and be like, nah, we don't believe he actually killed those people. He's lying, or whether the police would have cared to investigate it or anything. But it was interesting. And then his last chapter, the Jimmy Z story, which is like how he decides to help out this like geeky Jewish kid when he was young and getting picked on, and he goes through like his own head of seeing this like he calls Jimmy Z, like the local Jewish kid that's getting beat up, and for whatever reason he decides to beat up the bullies and defend the Jewish kid, and that's the way he ends his whole biography. And it's kind of like unintelligible if anything could be taken from this book at all.
I think Drescher is probably, telling the facts, I think, but I don't know for sure. I do know that I corresponded with him for about 10 or 12 years while I was doing my research. And I basically wanted to hear his side of the story of the assassination of Stephen Bryant. And we of course, we had about 200 letters that we shared. And I think basically what he was telling me was pretty accurate. except I knew that he was covering up for his fellow conspirators. There were people that he was covering for that he did not want others to know about. But I enjoyed reading his book. I think he's a good writer, actually. He's written quite a few things.
Yeah, well, I'm saying if you're believing him that man, is honestly telling you the stories about multiple people that he killed when he was younger, and so just it's hard to put in perspective if you say like, yeah, I'm not sure, and how that puts in perspective anything is, but it's also the type characters that if you have a preaching movement where you're trying to get people to change lifestyles and you're operating on street corners in major cities. Prabhupada writes it all the time. You're not necessarily going to get the best people. And I found your books are actually very instructional in the teachings. One thing you demonstrate, somewhat I'll call like a mastery of the basic Vaishnava teachings of the process of purification and soul refinement of Harinam Sankirtan. And the teachings, even in your book, you seem to demonstrate that the process of Harinam Sankirtan generally worked even with the 11 acharyas, even with all the characters in your book, that I mean, you seem to be a believer in the process. However, you're saying like, no, I mean, it didn't turn these people into saints, and they still did very bad things. And maybe for people who aren't, into religious, you could give some sort of comparison to like Joe Biden and Tara Reid. It's like, I believe Tara Reid, but I'm going to vote for Joe Biden anyways, or that's not the Joe Biden I know. Versus like, well, maybe that's not the Joe Biden that you know, but maybe he actually did these things at the same time. And then from a utilitarian perspective, if it's politics, we're like, I don't care, I'm voting for Trump or Biden, even though I think he did that. But in terms of a religious leader, you wouldn't be like, well, I'm going to follow Kirtananda, even though I do think he did these things. Or you say that there, for a period of a year, there actually was quite a faction who was like, I don't care if he did these, I'm going to keep on following him. And that's not outside of the norm of human psychology or even general politics or what we find in the news every day.
Yeah, I agree with you. In both these books and the third one coming out, I really try to be as objective as possible. I don't think I have an axe to grind, but I want to just tell the story of what happened. Like in 11 Naked Emperors, for instance, right in the beginning, I think it's the preface. I say I don't think they were all evil men, like so many today say they were. I think they were. There may have been a couple evil men. All right. There were two that I think really spearheaded.
Well, it's almost theological to say, is there such a thing as an evil man? Obviously, ISKCON theology may or may not have that. Makes sense to say someone's demonic, versus maybe a more system that people make good and bad decisions. Like we're both chess players, and it's just like, okay, for whatever reason, this guy made a series of horrible mistakes, and whether he was a good or bad person or good or bad intention doesn't change the fact that this person made some serious blunders.
Yeah, and that's a valid way to look at it. I think most of the 11 that I talk about in 11 Naked Emperors were well-meaning people, but they fell into a trap, and they couldn't get out by themselves because you fall in a trap, and they probably did. Some of them knew that they had fallen in the trap, and they tried to get out, but the others would not let them. Like Rameshwar, for instance, early on, he realized that he's no self-realized saintly master, and he took his throne out of the temple and began sitting on the floor with everybody else. And
it's a very difficult thing, and if a lot of people, I debate with, are connected to issues regarding multiculturalism and immigration. That if you're, who do you put these people in comparison to? You put them in comparison to, Prabhupada, and let's say Prabhupada was, relatively saintly, versus putting in comparison to like Ramdas and other contemporary figures that are promoting Eastern religions in America. and or you're trying to put them up to an absolute standard that may be impossible. And then you think American culture, like Ben Franklin, power corrupts, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Whereas then, like, of course you can't have an acharya, of course, like, power corrupts. You never heard that verse saying, like, no, I mean, this is what the scripture actually says. And if you're asking me to reform my beliefs because the beliefs are not in correspondence with current American norms, that they maybe were attempting, and there's obviously some bias that they're like, no, we're going to be strict on, doing this exactly the way the books say, because it favors them, because that being treated like, that would be an American norm of distrusting power and checking power. That there's certainly a bias for them to choose maybe scriptural origins of things that don't have systems of checks and balances of power.
Right, at New Vrindaban in the 80s, 70s and 80s, we were trying to transplant the cosmic order of the eternal cosmic order from India to the West, and the devotees call that Sanatana Dharma.
And also usurp, so to say, the Indian stronghold on, I don't know what to call it, their own religion, but that to say that these new converts to the religion have a better feel on the truth of the religion than people have been practicing it ancestrally for generations.
Yeah, but we were at odds with the established society, and because of that, when the girls come to puberty at New Vrindaban, they were betrothed to men who were in their 20s or 30s sometimes, and there were, I bet, 3 or 4 or 5 of my godbrothers, my buddies, had married girls that were like 13 or 14 or 15, like this, and that because that's the way it was done in India for thousands of years. See, so we were trying to transplant that here. In fact, when I was about 29 years old, one of the members came up to me. His daughter was 13 years old, and he asked me if I'd be interested in taking her hand in marriage. And I had seen the girl. I mean, at the time I was a brahmachari, a celibate student, kind of like a monk almost, except we were out doing fundraising all the time. But I did follow strictly the 4 principles. And he was just doing what he thought was the appropriate thing for his daughter to get her married off. I was well respected in the community, and I remember seeing her. She had I don't remember their names, but her name, but she had beautiful, long, straw-colored hair, very straight, and she was very pretty. But at the time, I wasn't interested in marriage. I was quite happy just being a celibate brahmachari and doing my service for my spiritual master. I wasn't interested in that. So, I mean, that's referred to. I mean, although in India and many other cultures, this was accepted for thousands and thousands of years. Today, it's
my background has a lot of parallels with Hasidic Jews, and even in Israel, like polygamy and various issues were the case in Hasidic settlements in New York. Even things like young marriage. I don't know, they got child marriage, but these are constant issues, and a lot of ISKCON, from my perspective, was kind of like I met Ramapada in Ann Arbor. He came to University of Michigan. I told him I thought he was a hero as a First Amendment champion. As an American, I had considered Ramapada like a champion of the First Amendment for my own purposes, to be able to practice my own religion. So there's a lot of interesting legal and social ramifications to giving people the right to practice things that they see fit. And obviously, in the day of coronavirus and vaccines, I think it's kind of also had things, sort of say, issues with not wanting to take vaccines, and other issues where it become a legal challenge where you might be a hero or a villain to people depending on their political views.
Yeah, exactly. There's, in many regards, the society changes as time passes, and what one culture in one time considers to be a correct behavior, another culture thinks it's child sexual abuse. See, the times change, and and it may be for minorities who do have, they follow ancient religious beliefs. It's difficult for them to live in this modern world where the majority of people they don't accept that. Even like female circumcision now has been outlawed in Sudan, but I'm convinced that many mothers will continue to have their daughters, this done for quite a while, and just see the Jews in male circumcision also. That's also something that I have heard that some
Iceland,
municipalities.
it's always constantly someplace somewhere that's looking to outlaw circumcision, and yeah, I mean, there's definitely interesting ways to look at it. There's also the multiculturalism of the changing America, where ISKCON was largely part of the hippie area, civil rights era, the change in immigration policy, and the move towards multiculturalism. And I mean, there's a lot of interesting things. Like I definitely want to at least ask you some questions about Radhanath Swami, because as I mentioned before we started talking, that I somewhat came onto the teachings from meeting Radhanath Swami, his disciples, in reading his book, The Journey Home, and he's probably the most prominent character, and kind of what we're talking about with like, okay, Joe Biden and Tara Reid type, relation. I mean, that's the in the news every day, and Radhanath Swami generally moves on to be one of the bigger players in ISKCON today. And you're saying that, I mean, you only know this from the archives, but there's substantial evidence that Radhanath Swami, God forbid, is involved in this man's murder. And what does that mean to you today? To is it possible that everything you say in the book is true today, but yet Radhanath Swami is basically a great guy, and all the people who believe in him should continue to believe in him? Or are you putting it out there that how does it fit in, like your views of Radhanath Swami, the information you're giving over, or what you want people to make of this information?
Well, right away in the preface to Killing for Krishna, I point out that I have no animosity to any of the members of the murder conspiracy. In fact, they were all, when I lived in Vrindaban, I respected them all, and they were all friendly to me, and I have nothing against them. What I am is a historian, all right, and a historian in some ways is like a scientist. I mean, a scientist is investigating some phenomena, and you do experiments under controlled situations, which you can repeat to gather data and find out whether your theory is correct or it's incorrect. See, and the scientist, the true scientist, he's not attached to the result. Whatever the data says, whatever the facts are, the scientist bases his concepts on that. And similarly, a historian like myself, when I started researching and writing about New Vrindavan, I thought it was a great place, a wonderful place, and it is, and it was, but not for everyone. All right, it wasn't a great place for the devotees who were murdered because they spoke out against the Swami Kirtanananda. It wasn't a great place for a lot of those children who at the boarding school were abused physically, mentally, and sexually by their own teachers and monitors like that. And that was very bad for them too, see. But as far as Radhanath goes, I always had friendly dealings with him. He's always, been friendly with me up until about 10 years ago when I started sharing the results of my research, and he was obviously implicated by the data in the trial transcripts, by the investigative reports that I found in the Swami Prabhupada. But I can't ignore that. You know, a historian, he's not attached to whether he thinks, New Vrindaban's a great place or it's a criminal enterprise. I am just reporting.
I mean, you could have a nuanced, dynamic view. There was both at the same time.
Yes, exactly. It's all of these things, right? And it was, and I don't know what it is. I'm not so interested in current history, but because I lived there for 15 years, it was important for me to research and find out what was going on, at least during the time that I lived there. But I mean, right in the preface to Killing for Krishna, I say that if people want to worship Radhanath Swami, all glories, good for them. If maybe they're getting benefits, but as a historian or as a scientist, I don't like duplicity. See, science doesn't work if you don't publish accurate results of your data. All right, it can't be. It doesn't work. Science can't work unless you're truthful about your data. And similarly, as a historian, so I, want to be as factual as I can in my books, and not to go on rumors or things like this. But it's hard for me to reconcile how someone can be a great, pure, humble, spiritual leader, and yet they consistently deny any involvement in past activities. To me, it's hypocritical.
Well, maybe it's more a question of how big of a sin is hypocrisy, and that's why I keep on mentioning, Joe Biden, Tara Reid, or something like that, where it's saying like, or even like the Ahmaud Arbery shooting, where people generally are dealing with things like these in the news every time, and when it comes to religion, you're going to say like, well, okay, it doesn't bother me that Trump or Biden is a hypocrite, but Radhanath Swami or any spirit, this priest, this rabbi, I don't want my spiritual leader to be a hypocrite. Versus maybe someone has more nuanced view where you could say there's a utility to looking at your spiritual leader as a perfect person, right? Maybe you have a Catholic background. In a lot of different religions, do a lot of interfaith have this kind of looking at your spiritual leader as perfect, and you could see there's a lot of utility within the religious system that you view your leader that way, versus like a leader, a modern psychological, scientific perspective. It's like people are not perfect. There are no such things as saints, and and then what's egregious or not, what's criminal, and what if God forbid Radhanath Swami said, yes, I was involved or maybe legally he's not allowed to talk about it. He might have from what you're had agreements with the FBI or whatever. He couldn't even talk about it if he wanted to. Versus the perspective, if you do want to fall into the system and to say that you do want the utility of looking at your leader as perfect, even though in reality your leader isn't perfect.
Well, that is one way to look at religious life and belief. I should mention, though, that in the Hare Krishna movement, Bhaktivedanta Swami, he basically always insisted that the guru, the Diksha guru, the one who initiates the disciple and begins the transmission of transcendental knowledge into their heart. Prabhupada said that person, many times he said he has to be a self-realized soul, and that means that you're egoless, like that. So I think,
as a scientist, you would have to reject that there is such a thing.
I'm not convinced that it's impossible.
Okay, yeah, I mean, I probably tend to believe more along with your lines, but I am a trained engineer and went to university, and you're not gonna. I even took this book off my shelf. I showed it to Romapod, and he didn't even want to comment on it. This one's about Lord Chaitanya. If you ever saw it, The Madness of Saints, and it tries to psychoanalyze Lord Chaitanya as being a manic depressive personality type and explain his behavior, and goes through a whole series of basically saying that the people that were considered saints in the Vaishnava tradition were all manic depressives, and that's probably more in line with science than saying that the person had some sort of like realized soul or some special. It would be very hard to scientifically, what does it mean to realize a soul? What's the process? And how is it that you think this person, or if it's based on result, and you're saying like, I don't know, maybe the person did a whole bunch of bad things, behind closed doors, and presented themselves like a saint in a Machiavelli Prince type way, where it's just more productive if everyone thinks you're a saint and doesn't know the negative stuff that you do, and that in reality, like all people throughout all of history always act in that way, where they portrayed themselves to the masses as saintly, but behind closed doors were very ruthless.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say, but there's many, 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 many ways to look at life and the world, and
Well, that's about the utility of your book, and I think you mentioned that your book is a #1 seller in Hinduism, in the sense like someone wants to know about the history of Hinduism in America, and you're saying like maybe someone's in India, and like I always knew that decades in the future, ISKCON was going to be all Indian, and that was always the intention of ISKCON the whole time, type perspective, and saying that ISKCON now, even though it may not have been your personal experience, ISKCON is basically a chapter in the history of Hinduism in America.
Yeah, well, it certainly is, as you said, a chapter of the history of Hinduism in America, and I do want to clarify that actually when the 11 Naked Emperors was first published, Amazon did tag it, I guess, as the #1 seller in, I think it was History of Hinduism category, but it did not stay there very, very long. Okay, but I'm very happy that it did receive a good reception like that.
I've done my own research on a few different topics that very few people ever heard of this man. Have you ever heard of Father Euquart?
Say that again?
Have you ever heard of Father Euquart?
I don't think so.
He was Prabhupada's ethics and I forget the subject teacher at Scottish Church College, and he eventually goes on to become head of Scottish Church College. And Prabhupada mentions him multiple times in a very positive light. I went to in Detroit, Prabhupada speaks with the local Catholic priest, and it's a very interesting conversation because, like, the Catholic priest from I'm not sure if you've been to Detroit ISKCON, but there's a Catholic church on the opposite corner, like a few hundred feet away. And then one of the higher ranking priests went to Detroit ISKCON to speak with Prabhupada. And from the conversation, which is recorded, not video, but audio and transcribed, at the beginning, it appears that they're confrontational. And at the end of the conversation, the priest tells the devotees, like, you listen to this man, he's a man of God. And Prabhupada talked to the priest about this guy, Father Euquart. He said, I went to Christian school and I learned my favorite class was Father Euquart, who eventually metaphysics. I think that's what Prabhupada took metaphysics from Father Euquart. And in almost half of the conversations I've found where Prabhupada talks to priests, usually Catholic priest, he usually mentions this man. And so I read his books, and it's interesting. And I hear from a lot of Hindus, they look at ISKCON as kind of like a Christianized version of Hinduism anyways. And but it's an interesting topic that I've researched is, an interesting also Scottish Church College is where Yogananda, the autobiography of a yogi, and Vivekananda went to school. That both of the other major people from the East that were successful in setting up movements in America were students of Scottish Church College. So that was interesting. I've also done a lot of research. Nowadays, if you go to ISKCON, like Hindu nationalism is extremely popular, and like the irony of Donald Trump, which I guess is Indians, Hindus became popular, very popular. But the question of Prabhupada's friendship with Sudra Chandra's Bose as a child, Prabhupada writes many times about his childhood friend, and the evidence, I guess, that he had a monthly or weekly class on nationalism at Scottish Church College that Prabhupada attended. And so Prabhupada now being looked at as this great warrior in Hindu Indian nationalism, before, and then kind of looking at your perspective, like, okay, like Henry, you're a good guy, and maybe Kirtanananda did some bad things or whatever, but you're a pivotal in the rise of Hindu nationalism, and now that India is a free Hindu nation. And I don't know if you've had much thought in that or been to like a modern Christian temple that is largely people who came from India in the last few years, and the popularity of Hindu nationalism, and then ISKCON. I don't know if you can consider it accurate, but I mean certainly from an India perspective, to make it look like Prabhupada was a pivotal figure in the movement of Hindu nationalism could certainly have benefit to certain aspects of the movement, but maybe it was never even once talked about when you were in Vrindaban.
No, I don't recall hearing topics like that. However, a couple of things I will mention. One is that Prabhupada himself, he didn't like it when people called them Hindus, and he was pretty much an anti-nationalist. You read his lectures and his books, he didn't have much faith in most governments. All right, including government of India. He spoke disparagingly about Mohandas Gandhi. He claims that Gandhi didn't. Gandhi did not force the British out of India.
Well, saying that's because Prabhupada was before his time. That saying Prabhupada was a right-wing extremist in that sense. That Prabhupada, it was unimaginable in Prabhupada's day that traditional Hindus would run India and run the government. And that's why Prabhupada is a revolutionary figure before his time, because he sets in path something that would have been impossible in his lifetime, which would have been, a traditional right-wing Hindus running their own country.
Well, that's very interesting. He did speak many times about the world in the future. He claimed that ISKCON, his movement, would become the dominant political and governmental and military force on the earth. All right, he really wanted to take over all the world's governments and make all the presidents and prime ministers and kings and dictators Krishna devotees. That's
ironic. That's Gopal Krishna Goswami. Like I'm sure you know him. He was probably in New Vrindavan for a period, who comes to Detroit every year, and now on Facebook, like every few months, is Prime Minister Modi coming to visit Gopal Krishna Goswami.
Yeah, well, we can't predict. We can't predict things. Are you familiar with the author Yuval Noah Harari? He wrote
the Israeli Buddhist kind of. I've never bought one of his books, but I listened to his lectures. I watched his conversation at the World Financial Summit or with Mark Zuckerberg.
I love his books. He has
But
got.
generally, I don't like evolution. He's very interesting, and part of the reason I teamed up with ISKCON in the beginning was because of my very strong anti-evolutionary stance. And I was like, "Well, you guys don't believe in evolution? I guess the old age." So I don't know if you've evolved on evolution or you're like Harari, even though you don't believe in evolution.
Well, I was going to say that I think in his first book, *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*, one chapter is talking about the rise of the monotheistic religions, which is Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and he talks about back in, I think it was the 4th century, Christianity was really still just a cult, underground mostly, minority, very minority, and he points out that no one at the time who was living at that time would ever imagine that this cult from Jerusalem would take over and become the largest world religion. On the no one would have been able to believe it, that it could possibly happen. And similarly, Harari writes, he says, just like today, he said, the future is always uncertain. Nobody, he says, can really predict accurately what's going to happen. If they do, it's an accident. You know?
Oh yeah,
but he says,
yeah, I mean, regardless of his evolution,
he says that just today, he says the Hare Krishnas are a minority cult. All right, and he says, but things can happen, just like Christianity became the dominant religion. He said that the Hare Krishna cult could also, that it can happen. It can happen, you know. Prabhupada predicted it, you know. So, and I don't know whether it's going to happen or not, but I thought it was very interesting because you don't know what's going to happen in the future.
I have someone in the chat is asking if you're familiar with Dave Emery and his scholarship on Hare Krishna movement.
Dave Emery and his scholarship fund?
No, just coverage of Hare Krishna. Just someone in the chat. I've never heard of Dave Emery.
I don't recognize the name.
Okay, I guess it's been about an hour. I could probably talk to you all day, but I really appreciate you coming on. I'm not sure. Is there any other subjects you'd like to talk about, or just say over to whoever may view this or find this video?
Well, if anyone's interested in reading Killing for Krishna or 11 Naked Emperors, that they can find it at my website or at Amazon.com.
I'll leave that in the description, the link to...
you're going to put that in there? Good.
It's already there, but I'll leave that there, and after we're done, I'll try to create some sort of timestamp index where we talk about what topics, and then people could just click on that, and it'll automatically take them to that point in the video. And I wanted to... My main purpose, I guess, was to encourage you to write your 3rd book, and thank you for writing your first 2.
Well, thank you so much. I've received many letters of encouragement from people who read the book, but I know for a fact that there may be more people who think it's a horrible book. All right, I mean, but they don't write personally to me. Very rarely, but they might put it up on Amazon or a blog post or something like that. But and that's okay. That's all right because I don't claim
you're the messenger. You're saying even to some people who you might be the bearer of bad tidings, that you're not doing it with any malice intent.
Many people say that, and yet others question my motives, and that's quite fine. All I'm trying to do is present a history of what happened as accurately as possible. It made their and that depends on the research and what my interviewee says. I mean, some people could make up stories, and some people have. And if I think this is just bullshit, I don't, I don't trust them. I don't trust them. But most of it, most of the people that I interview, I believe are speaking truthfully. So it's as accurate as we can get. Others will write more books about the history of ISKCON, and we welcome that.
Well, it's a question of your narrative frame, and I think interesting are those books on Vishnu Nujana, where a lot of people kind of like Vishnu Jan's the good guy and Tamal Krishna Goswami is the bad guy. But when you read in the books, most of the stuff that they were upset that Tamal Krishna Goswami was doing, he was discussing with Vishnu Jan and Prabhupada, and he was just the management. He was doing, he wasn't going against Vishnu Jan's wishes. They were working together, but it was kind of like, I don't know if to call it a good cop, bad cop thing, but a lot of people look at Tamal Krishna Goswami, bad cop, and Krishna Jan is good cop. And but from the book, it kind of uncovers the dynamic of the perspective, and I think there's a lot of useful information, no matter what perspective a person has, and it's the question of the narrative frame, where most books are written by the devotee themselves, and it's pro ISKCON, pro themselves. It's just the first person narrative, or like Stephen Rosen. I have his book on Bhakti Tirtha. It's this third person narrative that largely takes an uncritical, like legends of rabbis. Like I've hundreds of books of legends of rabbis, and if you're going to write a book about a rabbi to a Jewish audience, it's going to sell a lot more if it's like a legends about the rabbi, as opposed to a critical analysis. And you're saying you're doing a critical analysis, but if you do get your third major book that's going to be much bigger than these first two books, the question of the narrative frame and putting in relatively Kirtanananda and all the good things he did, and how he was pivotal in growing, and just the tertiary evidence, from the books of other devotees who wrote in that time, that is just very clear that Kirtananda was extremely important in the movement. And I didn't even ask you about it because I found it's in the the Monkey on a Stick book that I read years ago very quickly, about Ronald Reagan came to New Vrindaban and he met with Kirtananda Swami. And I can find almost nothing on that, and I don't know if it's kind of like if it's political or if it's,
I don't believe Ronald Reagan ever came to Vrindaban.
so that's a false thing that's just written in this.
I'm sure it is. We had in '85 in May at the Shilaropana ceremony, the ground laying ceremony for the proposed Temple of Understanding. We had a West Virginia congressman come, Alan Mullihan, but Reagan never came. We would have known about it, if he did. I mean, why would he even come there? It's like, wow.
I'm pretty sure it's in that book, but I guess I haven't heard these things for years. When I was in New York, when I was in Israel, most of the negative things I got towards ISKCON was it's a prohibition of idol worship, or like, don't think those guys on the street corner, like secretly they're going to try to get you to, worship forbidden idols. And then when I was in New York, like the people who knew about ISKCON had negative were always like, those guys are secret CIA. Like, don't think those guys on the street corner, not that they're going to secretly try to get you to worship idols, but they're going to, they're secretly CIA operatives. And, so there's actually reasonable supplication in literature to say that maybe, intelligence agents in Russia or India or the US were feeding false devotees into the movement for like international covert operations, and even I guess the government of India officially thought that ISKCON might have been involved in the assassination of Gandhi or something like that. And I was trying to look through some of the articles, and maybe that would have been before your time, to see, like, is it possible the CIA was like implanting, like assassins to pretend like they were ISKCON devotees.
Now this is very, very, very interesting. And I don't know how much time we have, but I could speak a little bit.
Well, I'm happy to hear about our time for a different show. And I'm mentioning that most of those things are years ago, and then you have the official opinion of India. And even till today, a lot of rival Hindu sects Some of them, okay, like ISKCON's controlled by Jews or it's a Christian movement, but it seems that the CIA one is the most common one. And that's why I was asking about Reagan, like, had Reagan met with Kirtananda, somehow did he get off the crime? Or even you mentioned Radhanath Swami and, the FBI, is it possible that that they helped him plant, some FBI informants within ISKCON or something like that? And that, some of these people were complicit in it. And those are the type things that I think are very interesting. Nobody outside of conspiracy theories writes about it, but it's the most common conspiracy theories about ISKCON.
Well, I do know that when Prabhupada returned to India in, I think it was 1970, with his white his white disciples, there was a lot of talk in the Indian newspapers that this was a CIA supported project, ISKCON. And at the time, I don't necessarily think that was correct, because
if you read this one,
which one?
Yamuna Devi, The Life of Unalloyed Devotion, that was written after she passed away recently.
I don't know that. Send me a link to it later.
Oh, it's a big book. It was kind of expensive, and it was written by this woman, Yamuna Devi. I guess she was in New Vrindaban. She was the famous one who wrote the book.
Oh, what's the title?
Yamuna Devi, A Life of Unalloyed Devotion.
Yes, I have heard it. I have not read it.
So she mentions that she was, I guess, Prabhupada's assistant when they met with Gandhi, and that all of a sudden there was a whole bunch of new devotees that were like supposed to be part of this group. And even Prabhupada himself was like, these are devotees? And like, yes, they were recently initiated by mail or something like that. Where, I mean, it's certainly not mentioned in her book or the writings, but it does appear that right before like she was part of a group that wanted Prabhupada to meet with Indira Gandhi. And that's near the assassination time. And then there's this like new group of devotees that all of a sudden just got initiated. And, Prabhupada's like, why are they here? And so, I mean, it's loosely fitting in things, but even if you look for the ISKCON accounts, like who were these people that met with Gandhi and what was their connection? And is it possible that like some of those people were really not ISKCON devotees?
It's possible, certainly.
And that may not have any bearings, I guess, more into Indian politics than what's currently happening in American ISKCON or worldwide ISKCON. And I get you. So you say New Vrindavan. That
we had a government informer. He was not a devotee, but he lived nearby, and he was a friend. Randall Gorby was his name. He lived about an hour drive north, and he was great friends with Hayagriva and Thomas Drescher, and he helped the community many times, especially purchasing properties for them, because the neighbors would not sell to the Hare Krishnas. But then he turned against them, and he became he would go to the state police, and he became an informer, and his phone calls were recorded which were used in the trial of the 1991 trial, and also for the trials of Thomas Drescher. And he eventually, the official word was that in 1990 he was found dead in his pickup truck with a hose connected from the tailpipe into his cab, and was officially ruled as a suicide. But people who knew him said that he was afraid someone was after him at that time. So we don't know. I'm not familiar with the life of a government agent. I mean, except for watching James Bond or something like that.
Well, we're talking about something extremely serious. We're talking about the U.S. government attempting to use fake ISKCON devotees to overthrow the Indian government or even assassinate its president. And that would have been before you joined the movement. And I don't know, like how if it's even conceivable that intelligence agencies were using ISKCON for that, or how long they did, and when they stopped doing it, if they were doing it.
It's possible. I don't know anything about that.
But I believe that's still a common critique of ISKCON that appears to be even to official Indian government documents. And and so it's interesting. You tell me the story of Reagan. That this book this has this false story of Reagan going to New Vrindavan.
Did you say that was a monkey on a stick?
I'm pretty sure I have to look that up.
Yeah, yeah. You look it up and then tell me what page I'm, because I have that book also. I want to look at that.
Yeah, and so I guess in terms of your literature, maybe just the last point of this kind of scholarship of the growth in Hinduism in America, or going back, like I did a lot of research into World War II, and you maybe kind of like Prabhupada has a lot of positive statements about Hitler, and there's certain political views related to World War II and the Gaudiya Math and Bhakti Ban Maharaj and various theological opinions of Hinduism, and then a greater scholarship. Now the narrative of so I don't know if you look at yourself as being useful, like Sri Nandana or something like that, where he could consider himself useful in the larger Hindu studies also, and travel to India and speak at conventions like that. If that's something, but then he also has to self-identify as a Hindu, where you would self-identify as a Hindu and consider your or is that beyond your belief system now, where you would self-identify as a Hindu or consider your scholarship uniquely useful to that purpose?
Well, I am not a Hindu. I'm not a Christian. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not a Jew. I am
A universalist?
but I appreciate their teachings. Not all the teachings, but I do appreciate religious people. But I also have a few atheist friends, and I appreciate their viewpoint just as much. So as far as me, right in the 11 Naked Emperors, in the preface, I say, I'm not a disciple, I'm not a follower, but I'm a friend of the disciples and followers. I mean, I lived 15 years of my life, as a Hare Krishna devotee, and I have many friends who I met there, and I'm still friends with them today. But I have many other friends, besides that, who are not, Hare Krishna devotees. So, I try to appreciate, whatever good is in.
Well, I mentioned your book sounds like you do believe in the process. And essentially, you still do believe in the essential process of Harinam Sankirtan and purification.
As a historian, I am simply telling a story, all right? And I'm presenting it from the viewpoint of a devotee of Krishna. These books, they're written for Krishna devotees, my godbrothers and sisters, all right? They're not written for the general public. Although many people that are not Hare Krishna devotees have told me that they appreciated, learning about this history, but there are difficulties for them because there's a lot of language in there that is unfamiliar to people who aren't familiar with the Hare Krishna movement. And but the books were written for devotees, and because I'm my perspective while as an author is from the perspective of a Krishna devotee. So even if I personally don't believe in something, all right, as a responsible author and historian, I'm just presenting the story as it happened. See, I don't put my own viewpoints in there. At least I try not to. I try to be objective. So it makes no difference whether I believe in Krishna as God or if I don't. As far as I'm concerned, it's just like a historian, just like a scientist. Whether he believes in God or he doesn't, it doesn't make a bit of difference in his research. all right, on the results of its experiments and data. It doesn't make a bit of difference because they're
Well, just the reason I'm asking, because you do write about me. You give a whole, I don't know how many tens of pages in the foreword to explain the theology. You have a whole chapter on the Ritwik question. And in general, your portraits, in my opinion, of the 11 empires carries this narrative arc of how they started in the movement and how the Harinam Sankirtan movement affected them. Because obviously you can't write a book on the subject without doing that. But that's, to me, I found that interesting. I guess someone outside of the movement. I don't know if from just your forward explaining the process and then the
yeah. Well, David, if I mean, I said I wrote these books for devotees, but I also understood that non-devotees would also want to read them. So I have to explain all these things to the non-devotees so they can understand the culture that these historical events are coming from. It's simply that I did not, I really try to keep my beliefs out of all this. These books are not about me, all right? It's about a historical narrative and what happened, and as far as that means facts, and if it's and the documentation, whether it's from news reporters, interviews, trial transcripts, what happened. I'm just trying to tell the story about what happened. I really don't want my personal opinions in there. Very rarely I do put my personal opinion in, but overall I'm just describing what happened.
Oh, well, you still need a narrative arc. I mean, you even discussed in the opening how your kind of angle where you're like, yeah, you were there, most of the characters in it as an observer. Yeah, no matter how you do it, it's difficult to design a narrative frame when you author a book.
It's you're starting to break up as far as the sound goes.
Oh, I apologize. I would just,
I don't know. Maybe it's my computer.
some background your noise. It's nice if you think your computer meeting.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's happening here. I'm not able to understand. Your voice is breaking up a little bit, but we've talked an hour and a half. I think that's probably enough for now.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So let's see what kind of feedback we get in the comments, and I appreciate you coming on, and I look forward to your next book. And I appreciate you explaining yourself and your ideas and your authorship, to me and my audience.
Thank you so much for inviting me, David. I'm impressed. I'm impressed with your erudition and your knowledge about so many of these factors. I think you've written books yourself.
No,
I'll bet you I would like to read it when that happens.
I would like someone to write a book, like I told, ISKCON and the Jews or something like that. I don't know who would write that, or I don't think I would be the person to write, or even like scholarship on.
No, because you are so knowledgeable about so many things. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I don't know you personally, but I mean, just from talking to you for this brief time, you're like what's the word of it means a well-rounded man. There was a term used, I think, in the 19th century.
Polyglot.
I wouldn't say that, but anyway, thank you.
I have extreme curiosity. Personally, I don't have necessarily an audience for people that are looking for me to teach them these things or give them this information. Basically, I love these teachings. I like chanting. I like process, and it's been interesting enough to me that even though I have no audience, because I'm not officially a member of ISKCON, even though I support them and help them and promote them, I consider my a friend a devotee or a devotee type without being initiated. It's just pure curiosity for me to understand God and spirituality better.
Well, I'm gonna sign off. Thank you again for inviting me, and Well, I want to keep in touch with you.
Okay, yeah, we'll do. Thanks a lot. So I really appreciate you coming on, and anyone who has questions, you put them in the chat, and I can try to forward them to Henry, and hopefully I'll have you back for your third book.
Sometime. Namaste.
Thank you.